Elias Boone dragged the bound outlaw and threw him to the ground. The townsfolk erupted in cheers, clapping each other on the back like they had just witnessed a sweet act of justice. An old man from the town council stepped forward, pointing toward two figures tied to the wooden post too tall. Muscular Apache women, their skin glistening with sweat, clothes in tatters, and dried blood streaked down their arms. "Here is your reward, Boone," the old man said, his voice as dry as dust. "These two belong to you now. Do whatever you want with them." Elias said nothing. His eyes moved to Takina, broad shoulders, a defiant chin, then to Saka, the younger one standing close by, her jaw clenched tight, eyes unblinking. The air was heavy, like forged iron. A few men in the crowd let out sleazy chuckles, waiting. Elias drew his knife from his belt and walked straight toward them. The crowd murmured, assuming he was going to drag them away. But with one swift move, the ropes fell to the ground. "No one is my reward," Elias said, his voice deep as thunder. "They are free." The square fell dead silent. A few men cursed and threw up their hands. A couple of rifles were raised, but Elias had already turned his back, tossing the knife to the ground. He led his horse out of town, red dust swirling into a long trail behind him. Behind him, Takina and Saka looked at each other, then quietly followed him out of the square, leaving behind the furious stares burning into their backs. The road back to the ranch was long and silent. The sun cast their shadows far across the scorched earth. Elias walked ahead, his posture upright, one hand leading the horse, the other always resting close to the grip of his revolver. Behind him, Takina and Saka followed like stone silhouettes without a word, without falling a step behind. The ranch came into view just as the sun began to dip. An old gray wooden cabin, a sagging fence, a horse stable without a single neigh. Elias led the horse in, tossed the reins over a post, then turned back. "The stable is empty. If you want to stay the night, that is where you can sleep," he pointed. Takina stood tall, her dark eyes flashing with suspicion. "You are not afraid we might steal your horse? Or kill you?" Elias lifted one side of his mouth in the faintest smirk, though his voice stayed even. "If that was your plan, you would have done it the moment we left town." "I am not afraid, but I am not stupid either." He tapped the gun holstered at his hip. Without waiting for a reply, Elias stepped into the cabin. As night fell, a soft yellow light glowed through the cracks in the door. Outside the stable, he left a bucket of water and some hard bread. No extra words. Inside the cabin, Elias sat alone by the fire, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He stared at the ceiling, listening to the faint sounds outside, the splash of water from Takina, the quiet sigh from Saka. It had been a long time since this place heard any voice besides horses and cattle. Out in the dark, Takina leaned against the stable wall, her hand brushing over an old scar on her shoulder. Her mind went back to the town square, the way that man had looked at her when he cut the ropes. No pity, no contempt, just a man doing what he believed had to be done. Saka curled up in a blanket and whispered in Apache, "Can we trust him?" Takina looked toward the lit cabin, silent for a long time. "I do not know, but at least tonight, we do not have to run." On the cabin porch, Elias laid the rifle across his knees. He did not sleep right away. His eyes stayed fixed on the yard, waiting for the night to pass safely. At dawn the next morning, when the first light still bathed the prairie in gold, Elias stepped out onto the porch and froze. The sisters had been up since the sky was still gray. Takina was hauling bundles of straw from the barn, muscles straining under a sheen of sweat, stacking them neatly in the corner of the stable. Saka knelt by the well, drawing up bucket after bucket of water to fill the trough for the horses. Neither of them looked at Elias. They simply worked, as if this were their own ranch. Elias crossed his arms and leaned against the porch post, watching silently. The sight made him pause for a breath. He had expected them to slip away during the night, or at the very least, sleep in and disappear by noon. But no, they were cleaning up the mess he himself had ignored for too long. When Elias walked over, Takina glanced up briefly. "We are working to pay for the roof over our heads last night," she said, her voice rough from the dust. Elias gave a small nod. "Do it if you want." He did not help. He just walked along the fence, pretending to check the posts, stealing glances in their direction now and then. The morning sun caught the scars on Takina's shoulders, the faded bruises on Saka's arms. Those marks did not come from a quiet life. By noon, Elias brought out a bucket of water and some bread. He set it down on the porch steps without a word. Sokka looked to her sister, then shyly stepped forward to take it. She sat by the stable post, drinking deeply. Takina stood nearby, eyes resting on Elias a little longer this time, as if weighing something. At last, she gave him a small nod, the first gesture that was no longer all defiance. That afternoon, Elias found the two sisters working together to patch the roof of the stable, torn up by storm winds. He stood watching for a long moment, then stepped forward to show them a better way to tie the rope down. No one said thank you, but once it was done, Takina stepped back, wiped the sweat from her brow, and quietly said, "It will hold." That night, Elias left an extra blanket by the stable door. He said nothing, but by morning, the blanket had been folded neatly and left on the steps clean and dry. Something had begun to shift, like a taut rope that had finally eased just a little. That night, the prairie wind blew in dry, ragged gusts. Elias had just snuffed out his cigarette in the kitchen when he heard a panicked bellow from the cattle pen. He grabbed his Winchester and rushed out onto the porch. The pale moonlight revealed the shadows of wolves circling the herd, their green eyes glowing bright. Before Elias could fire, a piercing scream tore through the night to Kina. She burst out from the stable, a broken spear in hand, swinging with such force that one of the wolves leapt back. Sokka was right behind her, picking up a rock and hurling it square at the pack leader's shoulder, making it yelp and bolt. Elias froze for a heartbeat, then raised his rifle and fired a warning shot. The crack of the bullet shattered the night, and the wolves scattered like smoke. Only the dust and the coppery scent of blood lingered in the air. Takina was breathing hard, sweat streaking her brow. She turned to Elias, her eyes still blazing. "They will come back," she said, her voice a command more than a warning. Elias met her gaze for a few heartbeats, then lowered his rifle. "Then we will be ready." The three of them herded the cattle back into the pen and barred the gate tight. That night, Takina and Sokka did not return to the stable. They sat by the fire out in the yard with Elias. The fire cast their shadows tall on the cabin wall, three figures, three battle lines, now drawn together. No one spoke for a long while. Only the crackle of burning wood and the hum of insects filled the silence. At last, Elias broke it. "Come inside and get something to eat. There is still some beans and bread left." Takina hesitated, just for a moment, then stood and motioned for Sokka to follow. They stepped into the cabin for the first time since they arrived. Dinner passed in silence, but the tension no longer hung like a stretched wire. Sokka sat close to the fire, her dark eyes watching the flames as if trying to find something lost. Takina finished her meal, set the spoon down, and looked straight at Elias. "Tomorrow, we will help fix the fence," she said, her voice firm. Elias simply nodded. He did not smile, but something stirred inside him, something quiet and strange. For the first time in years, this cabin no longer felt entirely empty. "I am truly grateful for your presence here." If this story brought back memories of dusty afternoons and the echo of hoofbeats in your heart, then subscribe to my channel so that every day we can sit down together again, and I will tell you another tale from the West. The next morning, before the early sun had a chance to dry the dew, Elias was already leading his horse out to haul lumber. Takina and Sokka followed quietly behind. No one asked, no one was told. They worked through the morning. Takina carried each log, muscles tightening under the sweat on her back. Sokka hammered stakes into the ground, each strike solid and precise. Elias stood nearby, noticing how they moved with the confidence of people who had built homes before, not those merely living off someone else's mercy. By midday, Elias wiped the sweat from his brow and handed a canteen to Takina. She took it, drank deep, then handed it back without breaking eye contact. A simple nod, no words, but Elias felt, somehow, as if he had just been accepted. That afternoon, Elias opened an old wooden chest inside the cabin and pulled out two rifles, worn, but still in good shape. He brought them to the porch and set them down in front of Takina and Sokka. "If you plan on staying more than just one night," Elias said, "you need to know how to protect yourselves." Takina picked up the rifle, inspecting it carefully, like she had done this many times before. Sokka tried hers as well. The stock fit her shoulder perfectly. They practiced shooting until the sun began to dip. Gunshots echoed across the open field, the smell of gunpowder mingling with dry grass. Elias stood behind them, watching. They hit the target more than they missed. When night fell, The three of them sat outside for dinner. The air was different now, not tense, not uncertain. It felt like three comrades sharing a meal after a long day's work. For the first time, Sokka spoke about the night their tribe was attacked, how fire devoured the village, how the screams of children mixed with the pounding of hooves. They ran for 2 days. By the time they looked back, there was nothing left. Elias went quiet. In his mind, he saw again the graves beneath the oak tree behind the house, his wife and children, taken by fever. And in that moment, under the crackling fire, his pain no longer felt like something he bore alone. Takina looked at him, her eyes softer than before. "If anyone comes here again," she said, "we will not run." Elias nodded slowly. "Then from now on, this is home for all three of us." The night wind carried the scent of fresh grass, and those words hung in the air like a contract, one that needed no paper, no ink. 3 days later, the sound of hooves echoed from afar, dry and sharp, like a funeral drum. Elias stepped onto the porch, his hand already resting lightly on the grip of his revolver. A group of 4 horsemen stopped at the gate, led by the deputy sheriff of Dry Creek. His face was flushed red, from sun and arrogance. "Boone," he shouted, his voice ringing across the yard. "The council has decided. Either you hand over those 2 Apache women, or you lose this land. We will not allow you to turn this ranch into a haven for filth." Takina and Sokka appeared at the stable door, their shoulders still streaked with dust, their eyes sharp with fire. Elias raised a hand, signaling them to stay back. "This is my land. I am not harboring anyone. I just gave them a place to stand, the same way I would give a meal to any soul who had nothing," Elias said, his voice deep as thunder. The deputy spat into the dirt. "Think hard. You've got 1 week. If they are still here, we'll come and take the land by law." They turned their horses and rode off, red dust swirling behind them, leaving the ranch yard heavy as stone. That night, Elias sat alone on the porch, his glass of whiskey drained to the bottom. Takina stepped out and sat beside him. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, finally, "We will leave before they come back. You should not have to lose your land because of us." Elias stared into the darkness over the grass, to the spot where he had buried his wife and children. His voice came out hoarse. "I already lost everything once. If I let you go now out of fear, then I lose myself too." Takina looked at him for a long moment. What she saw in his eyes was no longer pity, it was resolve. "Then we stay," she said firmly, "and when they return, we will not hide." Sokka stepped out, standing behind her sister. "If we have to fight, we will fight." Elias stood and looked at them both. "Then starting tomorrow, we get ready." The next morning, they began reinforcing the fence, stacking sandbags to cover the windows, checking every round of ammunition. The little cabin turned into a fortress, and Elias knew this next battle would decide who truly deserved to keep this land. On Saturday afternoon, dark clouds gathered overhead like a warning of the storm to come. Elias stood on the porch, Winchester in hand. Takina and Sokka were ready, one with a rifle, the other with a spear and a hunting knife. The sound of hooves came before the red dust did. This time, there were twice as many of them, at least 8 riders, weapons gleaming. The deputy sheriff led the group, his mouth twisted in a sneer. "I gave you a week. Now it ends," he growled, signaling his men. 2 riders flung flaming torches into the dry fence. Fire roared to life instantly. "Fire!" Elias shouted. Gunshots shattered the wind. Elias's first bullet dropped a man charging in with a lasso. Takina's shot struck another in the shoulder, knocking him clean off his saddle. Sokka, quick as a cougar, hurled her spear straight through the axle of the kerosene wagon. It flipped sideways, blocking the path. The attackers fired back. Bullets ripped through the cabin's wood siding, splinters flying. Elias rushed forward and fired twice more until a bullet slammed into his shoulder. The force knocked him hard to the ground. "Elias!" Takina roared, her voice like a lion's. She ran, shooting as she moved, and dragged him behind the water trough. Blood soaked through his shirt, but Elias growled through clenched teeth. "Do not let them break the fence." Sokka let out a cry and charged, knife in hand, taking down a man who was lighting a torch near the cattle pen. Seeing the fierce resistance, the deputy cursed and gave the order to retreat. "Next time, we come back with the whole damn town," he shouted before galloping off into the dust. Smoke and flame still lingered in the air. Takina and Sokka rushed to stamp out the fire, while Elias sat slumped against a wooden post, hand pressed over the wound. His palm was slick with blood, but a weary smile touched his lips. "We held our ground," he whispered. Takina knelt beside him, her eyes burning with anger and fear. "You are such a damn fool," she muttered, but her hands trembled as she wrapped the wound tightly. That night, the three of them stayed awake. The cabin sat in darkness, the only light from the flickering fire casting their shadows on the wall. 3 figures, once strangers, now bound as one. For 3 straight days, the cabin was thick with the smell of gunpowder, smoke, and dried blood. Elias lay in bed, his shoulder wrapped in white bandages, sweat soaking through his shirt. Every morning, Takina changed his dressing, her hands rough, yet careful. Sokka kept the fire going in the hearth, cooking thin soups and making sure Elias drank every drop. On the 4th night, Elias began to speak in fevered whispers, calling out for the wife and children he had lost. Takina sat beside him, holding his hand tightly. For the first time, the warrior in her eyes softened. "You are not alone," she said gently in Apache, though she was not sure he could hear. When the fever finally broke, Elias opened his eyes to see the 2 sisters asleep beside the fire. A strange feeling washed over him. This cabin was no longer empty. It had become a place where someone waited for him to live. 1 week later, Elias could stand again. He and the 2 sisters rebuilt the fence, every post driven deeper than before. Takina carried water from the well, her muscles shining with sweat in the Sunday. Sokka hauled bundles of straw, her face dusty but lit with a quiet smile. That afternoon, as the final section of fence went up, Elias leaned against a post, looking out over a week's worth of labor. He turned to the 2 women, wiping sweat from their brows. "From this day on, this is our home," he said. "Anyone who wants to take it will have to walk over our dead bodies first." Takina looked at him in silence, then gave a slow, steady nod. Sokka stepped closer and placed her calloused hand on Elias's arm. No words, but her eyes said everything. That evening, the sunset burned across the sky, turning the whole field red. The 3 of them stood in front of the cabin, their shadows long on the dry earth, 3 silhouettes, 3 silent vows etched in dust. Elias breathed deep, taking in the scent of scorched grass, sweat, and warm soil, all of it blending into the smell of home. For the first time in many years, he no longer felt alone. My friends, love is not found in moonlit promises. It is in the moment someone stands beside you when the wind kicks sand into your eyes. True kindness is not about doing what is easy, but about choosing what is right even when it costs you something. And when a person is willing to bleed for what is right, they do not just defend the land beneath their feet, they keep hold of their heart. Above all, my wish is for you to always be happy and healthy. I love all of you, my dear, loyal viewers of Wild West storytelling. Let me know what this story meant to you. Leave a comment below. Type 1 if you enjoyed this story. And do not forget to subscribe to the channel for more gripping tales from the Wild West.